Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. The fifth book of the 5 books of Moses is called Deuteronomy in Greek and referred to as Mishneh Torah in Hebrew, both of which mean the Second Torah or the replayed Torah. Join us as we explore how the Torah has been renewed and rediscovered over time. So put on your headphones and set up your turntable as we spin a Second Torah. Well, welcome. I wasn't prepared to celebrate Simchas Torah in the middle of the summer, but the truth is, at the end of last week's podcast, Rabbi, you reminded us that it was a chazak moment. We had finished the book of Numbers, and really, if you take a few verses from Deuteronomy, Devarim, that we're going to start reading today, and you put on the end of Moshe's career, you really have finished the whole Torah. It is a complete literary unit. And that is why so many people hear a different voice in the book of Deuteronomy, and why, as I said in the intro, even the name, in the name that we refer to it, literally means the second or repeated law in Greek. And we'll see in a second that it's also called Mishneh Torah, which similar to Lechem Mishnah, which is the 2 pieces of bread, of manna that they got before Shabbat. Mishneh is like Shnayim. It's repeat, it's turn, it's dual. So let's just jump in to verse 1:1 in Deuteronomy, which is where the other name of Deuteronomy comes from. And it says, Elu hadvarim, these are the words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan. So the Hebrew books, our names for them are very similar to the names we give the Parshiot. Pretty much you just take the first word that comes up, and that's why we have Bereshit and Vayikra, and so that's really, without any significance or meaning, why the other name for the book that we're starting today is Devarim. But it does already kind of tickle our fancy by saying these are the words that Moses addressed on the other side of the Jordan. Already it's changing the voice of the whole book that we're going to hear, which is ultimately a bunch of sermons in the voice of Moses. I think that's kind of fascinating, and I think it's so important that we have that in mind as we read it, because it really does, and we're going to take a few examples today in our own parsha about how the voice is different. But it is kind of radical. It's a new start today. Mazel Tov, Simchas Torah, here we are.
Fantastic. Can't wait to begin.
So the word that Mishneh Torah comes from is actually a few chapters ahead in 1718, and it talks about this ceremony where the king not only had to write the Torah, but he had to also read it. And it says in 1718, when he's seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the priests. And it refers to Mishnat HaTorah, the relearning. I mean, we know the word Mishnah from how we refer to the oral law of Yehuda Hanasi, which we'll see in a second is also a repetition, is a repeat of the Torah. So everything here has to do with how this is unique on the one hand, but how it's also a reflection and a redo, so to speak, on what we heard at Sinai. And so even if you look at our portion, it says in Deuteronomy 1:6, our God spoke to us at Horeb saying, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. So if you look at the Hebrew, it says, Hashem Elokeinu diber eleinu mechorev. all of a sudden it's a different tense. You pointed out a number of podcasts earlier, Rabbi, how in every blessing we change our tense. And here you have Hashem Elokeinu. And it's not a quote of a blessing or a quote of a verse. It's actually Moses saying about, and this is what our God said to us. He's talking to the people of Israel directly. And I must say, I was struck by the fact that he says a few times in this week's Portia, Rav Lochem, you stayed at Sinai too much. And of course, we know Rav Lochem
That's a great line.
That's going to be next year's podcast, because I don't know if he was rubbing it in or not. But let's keep on track here. It says in Deuteronomy in our portion 122, and he's recounting the history, the recent history. And it says, then all of you came to me and said, let us send agents ahead to recontour the land for us and bring back word on the route we shall follow and the cities we shall come to. And I approved of the plan. And so I selected from among you 12 participants. I mean, it's almost as though God didn't play a part. In Numbers 13:1, it says, God spoke to Moses saying, send the agents to scout the land of Canaan. It's almost as though we're reading the notes on a video or the outtakes or the editors or the producer's edition. Are you struck by that the way I am?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the Mishneh Torah, the book of Devarim, is written in Moses' voice. That's really the point you made of Hashem Elokeinu. Moses is the one who's speaking. That's different than the rest of the Torah. The rest of the Torah is in the voice of the narrator. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, right? Most of the Torah is a third party, and God spoke to Moshe. But in Devarim, in Mishneh Torah, it's in Moses' voice, Hashem Elokeinu. He's telling the people, our God spoke to us. It really makes it very personal. And actually, it's not this week's parasha, it's next week's parasha, where we see that Vayetchananu Hashem, that Moses begs God to let him enter the land. It's really the last time that Moses begs God to enter the land. It's clear from this first person, dialogue of Moshe, that it's really a tragedy that he's not given the opportunity to enter the land.
Yeah, the voice thing is absolutely fascinating. I think the other thing is, if we look at the word Mishneh Torah in the rabbinic literature, this is not an interpretation. This is literally what it was called. So if you look at the Sifrei Devarim, when it deals with the requirement that I mentioned before of the king having to write a Sefer Torah, it says, this tells me only of the Mishneh Torah, meaning the book of Devarim. Where do we derive that the mitzvah also applies to the rest of the Torah? So it was so common language, common nature, that when it says Mishneh Torah, it meant the book of Devarim, that now the rabbis are asking, how do we know the king has to write a complete Sifrei Torah? And so it learns it from another source. But then it says, so why was it written Mishneh Torah if, in fact, you have to write the whole Torah? And then it says, because in the days of Ezra, they are destined to change the script. So now we're starting to get a little bit of a sense, and you know me, Rabbi, I always try to combine what contemporary, critical, scientific thinkers say about our Torah and the rabbis. And we'll see very soon that there are many modern-day scholars who believe that the whole book of Devarim was written in the time of Ezra, and it's made for the people returning to the land. But here we have in the Talmud itself this sense that the book of Devarim all of a sudden was written in Ktav Yasharit, in this different script. And so you definitely get a sense that even the rabbis understood that not only was there something different here, but the language was different. And let me just quote a little bit more from the Talmud in Sanhedrin that says that he had to write the second Mishneh Torah And it says, because the script is apt to be changed. Lehishtanot. And of course, lehishtanot is very similar to manishtana. How will it be changed? So why is this script called Ashurit? Because it ascended with the Jewish people from Ashur when they returned from their exile in Babylonia. So sure, the rabbis are in no shape or form agreeing the biblical critics who said that this thing was written at a later date in the exile, coming back from the exile. But what they are saying is at least it was written or rewritten in a script that came from the exile, and maybe because it was talking specifically to the people coming back from the exile. You know, some of the ideas in Devarim that are different is it really focuses on getting rid of the idols, on monotheism. It focuses on returning to the ways. So I just see a confluence here that we really don't have to disagree. We can all look at it specifically from a traditional or a scientific perspective, but come up with the same conclusion.
That's great. I love that, because it's so difficult to know what that means, that it's written in a different hand, in a different, different formation of the letters. What does that mean? But of course, what it means is that it was written for a different group. It was written for the people who were returning to the land. And exactly what you said, the idea of anti-idolatry. While it does appear, it appears in the Ten Commandments, it's not a theme of the first 4 books of the Torah. And all of a sudden, in the book of Devarim, they're literally obsessed with idolatry. And clearly what they're worried about is they're worried about these people who are idol worshipers, right? That's what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm going to quote from Ramban Nachmanides in his introduction to the book of Devarim. And again, he is recognizing the difference. He says, this book is known to constitute a review of the Torah, in which Moses, our teacher, explains to the generation entering the land most of the commandments of the Torah that pertain to Israelites, as opposed to priests. He does not mention anything relative to the law of the priests, neither about the performance of the offerings, nor the ritual purity of the priests and their functions, having already explained those matters to them. He goes on to say, thus there are in this book many admonitions regarding idolatry that follow one after another, as well as chastisements and a sound of terror, casting upon them the fear of all the punishments for the transgressions. Additionally, he proclaims commandments which have not been previously mentioned at all. So here it's kind of fascinating. He's making a major move now. On the one hand, he's saying that in agreement with what we were talking about, that this is for people returning to the land or coming to the land for the first time, and it really is focused not on all of this cultic stuff, but on getting rid of idolatry. But now he makes a fascinating move, and he says there are new commandments here. And he says, now all these laws had in fact been declared to Moses either on Sinai or in the tent of meeting. He is talking about the book of Devarim is the first inkling, the first insight we have to an oral law. Because we are now hearing about things in the book of Devarim that we didn't hear before, but Ramban is claiming they were said before. This was a total revelation to me as I prepared this week.
That's a great thing. I mean, that's kind of the tension about how exactly the Torah was given. Up to now, the Torah has basically been a chronological history of the Jewish people. Every once in a while, you have some Rashi saying, this story is out of order. But more or less, it's a chronological history of the Jews. And all of a sudden, now you have this reflection of Moshe. It's not exactly clear when this reflection happens and how it kind of plays itself out. For instance, in this week's parasha, you have a retelling of the story of the spies. It's the same story. But, when Moses tells it, it's a slightly different story than when the Torah originally told it. When the Torah originally told it, it seems like Moses sent the spies. But when we've retold this week, it sounds more like the people sent the spies. Moses changes it a little bit to kind of take some of the blame away from himself. It really plays Moses as a very human character, which is fantastic.
I'm going to kind of continue in what you're saying and combine it with what I just heard the Ramban say. The Ramban said that there are new laws here that were not invented here. They were given before in the tent of meeting, and they were oral until they were written down in Dvarim. But what you were saying was something fascinating, because what you're saying is that Midrash was also put into Devarim, because isn't it Midrash when you describe the same event slightly differently? I mean, isn't that what our Agadata is all about? Isn't that what all the lore and legend of Judaism is all about? It's about taking the original story of the spies and then repackaging it, reciting it, and I think if that's what you were saying, I'm with you 100%. It's really amazing.
That is exactly what I'm saying. It's a restaging of some of these stories. In next week's parasha, you have the 10 Commandments. Even the 10 Commandments, can you believe it? The 10 Commandments are not exactly the same. For instance, the commandment about Shabbat, when it first appeared in the book of Exodus, it said Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. You should remember the day of Shabbat. And in next week parasha it says Shamor. You should guard. And they say Zachor means the positive ways of observing Shabbat, of making kiddush and eating food and all those things. And next week we have the negative commandments of Shabbat, which is so interesting. I just want to make a point which is not related to this, but I marked down that I was going to say it. This week, I think it's important to mention something. And that is that this week, Shabbat goes into Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, the day in which we commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And what's interesting is, and it relates to our Torah reading as well, what's interesting is that actually the 9th of Av on the calendar is Saturday. It's Saturday. It's not Sunday. But we don't observe Tisha B'Av on Shabbat. We push it off to Sunday. Shabbat, the observance of Shabbat, the idea that you eat and you enjoy, that beats out the morning of Tisha B'Av. And that's our religion believes that celebration beats out mourning. And I think that's a very powerful kind of idea. The only fast day that actually can be observed on Shabbat is Yom Kippur. You can fast on Yom Kippur on Shabbat. That's different because Yom Kippur is not considered to be a sad day. It's a serious day, but it's not a sad day. But Tisha B'Av is a sad day. We don't have sad days on Shabbat. That's why I know Orna just finished Yom Shiva, but if the Shiva were to conflict with a holiday, then actually the Shiva is canceled on behalf of the holiday because celebration always beats mourning in Judaism. So I think that's a nice lesson, especially for this Shabbat this week.
I think it's an amazing lesson, and it's a wonderful segue into what I want to talk about now in terms of picking up on where the Ramban left off. I've already alluded to the fact that Mishneh Torah has in it the word Mishneh, which is the oral law written down by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi after the destruction of the temple, after Yochanan ben Zakkai decided that it was more important to give the Jews a future with Yavna and its wise men. And so, in a sense, there's a total connection between what we're talking about today, whether it's in the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, or later in the Mishnah made by Yehuda Hanassi, to the fact that life takes precedence, and where that life is in the living, dynamic traditions that we have that are constantly being renewed, replayed, and reflected. So I think that the person who took the word Mishneh Torah and made it the most famous was a medieval scholar named Maimonides. And Maimonides did something very radical. He took all the laws of the Talmud, and instead of requiring that every Jew be learned enough to go through all of the spins and tails and curves of the Talmud, he codified it, and he made it into an indexed, a phone book of Jewish law, if you will. And that was considered very radical. And he called it Mishneh Torah. And he wrote an introduction to the Mishneh Torah that basically gives the history of Torah being renewed. And so in the introduction, he says, all the word that I commanded you, ye shall observe to do, is written in Deuteronomy 13:1. And he says, this is the source of the oral law, that we know in the Torah, because it relates to this word, that there was an oral tradition. And he said that Joshua likewise continued throughout his lifetime to study it orally. So we have this book of Devarim, which, according to the Ramban, is already the beginning of writing down an oral tradition, but certainly preserving it. And then he goes to Rabbi Yochanan, son of Zakkai, had these 5 disciples, and he passed it on to them. And then Rabbi Gamliel, the elder. And then it finally gets to our holy master, Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the prince, who compiled the Mishnah. And it says, from the days of Moses our master till our holy master, Judah the prince, no textbook of the oral Torah was public instruction had been issued. The practice, therefore, being for the precedent of a tribunal or a prophet, and everybody, a given generation, keep privately written memorandum of his master's oral teachings, out of which he in turn instructed the public orally. So Maimonides goes into detail how actually there was not only this tradition, but a very strong tradition to the extent of almost being a prohibition against writing all of these things down. And then he explains that Yehuda Hanasi realized that the people were being dispersed, the temple had been destroyed, and if the oral Torah was not to be forgotten from the midst of Israel. So what did the Holy Master do? He did what he had to do. And and he has beautiful poetic language about, he observed that the number of students continued to decrease, whereas the volume of oppression continued to increase, that the Roman Empire continued to spread out its boundaries. So really, if you want to talk about the connection between this week's Parsha and Tisha B'Av, it's all here. It's the dialectic between preserving, rewriting, and renewing our tradition, and the oppression that is so representative by the Romans. So he goes into very detail about what Yehuda Hanasi did. But of course, the punchline, because this is the introduction to his revolutionary book, he says, therefore I, Moses, son of Maimon of Spain, girded up my loins, and supporting myself upon the rock, blessed be he, made a comprehensive study of all of these books. And he goes on to explain what he's going to be doing in his book, because he knew it was controversial. And I think it's a wonderful history of how the oral tradition and the renewal of the written tradition have been renewed in order to let us survive.
So that's beautiful. The Rambam says in his Mishneh Torah that basically a Jewish library only needs 2 books. It needs a Torah and it needs a Mishneh Torah. So he actually saw his Mishneh Torah, his encyclopedia of Judaism, as a Mishneh Torah, the way the book of Devarim is a Mishneh Torah, which is kind of a summary of the Torah. So it's not just that he's borrowing the phrase, he's actually using it in exactly the same way, which is an amazing thing. And he was criticized because they thought that he was too arrogant, actually. They said, who are you to say that you don't need any other books except for the Torah and your Mishneh Torah? What about the whole tradition of books? What about the whole tradition of scholarship? Why don't you need that? And Maimonides basically thought that the average person, that he would distill all the law for the average person, and the average person did not need any other books. It's an amazing idea.
I mean, I love the fact that you reference how controversial it was, but also the hubris involved, or as we Jews say in Latin, the chutzpah of it all. I mean, if you look at his language, he writes, the whole scope of pure language and concise style, so the oral Torah be entirely methodical in the mouth of everybody, without query and without repartee, without the contention thus of one of such and another, but clear text, cohesive, so that all laws be open to young and old, whether they be laws concerning each and every commandment. He's basically saying, he sounds almost like someone standing up and say, I have a new gadget. It's going to replace everything in the house. It can do anything you want. And he writes it in this manner after this long introduction, but he introduces this concept of you need to have a little bit of chutzpah to do this. And we all know, in his mind anyway, that Yehuda the Nasi needed chutzpah to do it. He needed to stand up against people who were saying he was giving up on Jerusalem, he was giving up on the temple. It's fascinating, this especially when we look at people in our history who stand up and go against the current, and how they are criticized. Here are individuals and books that were written because of them that were radical in their day, and ultimately played a role, because I don't think that Maimonides at the end of the day was correct. The last thing we would want would be to throw away the Talmud and all of that's involved in it, and just look at his homogenized process product. But nonetheless, he founded Jewish law in a way that the people owned the law, and that the Shulchan Aruch could be written, and that people could find out what was the right path to take, and for a decentralized Judaism.
Yeah, so what you just said is very interesting. The Rambam was wrong. That's absolutely right. The Rambam was wrong. We couldn't have managed with just the Torah and the Mishneh Torah and Maimonides' encyclopedia. It's interesting what he thought, right? I mean, what do you mean the Rambam is wrong? He was pretty smart. He probably was as smart as we were. So why was he wrong? I think he was wrong because he underestimated the Jewish mind and the commitment of the people. He kind of shortchanged everybody. He said, hey, you know what? They're not going to really study the Talmud. They're not going to really study the other commentaries. Let me write a book that's easily understandable, that's accessible. We have the phrase today we use, user-friendly, right? Well, let me give them a book that's user-friendly. And basically, we don't need user-friendly all the time. We can work hard, right? The way you put together your Sefaria sheets, people have been putting together Sefaria sheets for generations. Now, they didn't have Sefaria. It wasn't as easy in the old days. But the same idea of going to the different sources and seeing the variety of opinions is really the richness of the tradition. But in a way, that's a sophistication. Right? To be able to understand a richness of tradition based on different traditions is actually kind of sophisticated. And Rambam says, I'm not sure that everybody's so sophisticated. It's an interesting discussion. It's an interesting debate. So you say the Rambam was wrong, but he wasn't just that he was wrong. He had a very specific view, which turned out not to be correct, because we're better than the Rambam thought we were.
Well, and maybe it's as trivial as he didn't have a vision of the printing press.
Yeah, well, how could he possibly? Right.
So I when I say he's wrong, I don't think he's wrong in writing the Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah is a brilliant work. We both agree upon that. But I think you're right. We can disagree about whether his prognosis for the Jewish people, who ultimately has its own genius inside of it, was shortchanged. I'd like to end, because as you say, we are right in front of Tisha B'Av and the destruction that involves, is, to say that really in Kings, there is a story about a scroll that is found in the times of King Josiah, and many people, including the rabbinic authorities, believe that they found the scroll of the Mishneh Torah amongst the rubble. And I have that vision here. I also have the vision of Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had to be smuggled out of Jerusalem because there were zealots surrounding it, and they didn't want anybody to compromise their vision of martyrdom. And he put himself in a coffin so that he could be smuggled out and create Yavna v'chachameha, Yavna and its wise men. And I look at these two visions of finding a scroll in the destructed part of the temple, the desecrated part of the temple, and of this coffin going out. And both of them have to do with rewriting the book in a new way, in a new day. And I think that ultimately is the positive vision that we need to take away from Tisha B'Av, that brings us into the Nachamu and all of the 15th of Av that we spoke of last week.
Right, and we definitely will. So we look forward. Next week, I will be in Beersheba, so officiating at a wedding. So we will do a lunch and learn at noon next Thursday. So look forward to seeing everybody at noon next Thursday. Want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy the beginning of Devarim. I think we kind of showed some of the richness of the text and of the discussion of the whole topic of Mishneh Torah. Have an easy fast, everybody, and we look forward on the other side to a time of Nachamu and of good things. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Be well.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Have a Nesiyah Tova, a good trip to the holy city of Beersheba, and to everyone else. Let's all enjoy this new book seen through a new lens.
Thanks. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.